So this is sort of just like a follow-up to the first video I just recorded. I wanted to take advantage of this gorgeous landscape that I'm sort of walking through, and wanting to maybe say a few things about what this channel is, Circle 8, you know. I always find that when I plan something out, or I write a script, or even write notes, I can never speak. Like, the only way that I speak is by speaking without thinking. And I remember being paralyzed by an English textbook that I discovered once at Half Price Books, that it said that one has to know what they're thinking before they write. The textbook had said that one cannot write without knowing what they're thinking, you know. And I think a lot of people would be sort of chagrined by that, because there's a sense in which a lot of us, in fact, I know there's a lot of other textbooks that even recommend it, the contrary idea, which is that you actually don't know what you're thinking until you write it. You don't know what you're thinking until you write it. And so I don't know what I'm thinking until I say it. And so when I start planning out to speak about what is most important to me in my life, you know, I don't know what to say. And that's not uncommon, you know. And yet, what's ironic is that if you just sort of allow yourself to speak, things become clear, because it's almost like something is working itself out. And so Circle 8, in its own inherent nature, is like an organic process. Like, this channel is sort of an expression of who I am. And it really is like a mirroring of my underlying mind. And there's so many ways that I want to describe this to you, because I'll admit it, I think kind of analogically. Like, I have a tendency to be metaphorical or ironical or elliptical or evasive, but there's a sense that Circle 8, in its very name, like, describes that, you know. And so in many ways I'm circulating right now, because I have that feeling that even when you're lost, you're found. And I always feel like when I say something like that, it can come off as very trite. So you'll have to forgive me, because I do have a tendency to say the most basic things, you know, you might say. But I think there's a sense in which I'm speaking from the heart. And so I think that should mean something. And Circle 8 is an expression of that circulating trust that I sometimes call a boomerang theory, you know, because I find that when I can't remember what I'm going to say, or when I start to say what I want to say but I can't remember, because sometimes I qualify what I say so much, or I want to explain what I'm about to say, that I suddenly forget like what I was going to say. And so again, Circle 8 is sort of an affirmation of that, because my boomerang theory in many ways means that things come back to us. And again, I don't mean to be trite, you know, I have to guard against that. I am critical, I promise you. No, but I'm first of all affirmative. So what I mean to say is that the trust that I have in this thing coming back to me is, in many ways, like, it's another analogy. I'm not speaking literally, but the analogy is with, God, these colors and landscapes are so perfect. I don't think my phone will ever capture this. But the analogy that I dare use is with alchemy, because I think there's a sense that thinking is slightly alchemical. And again, I don't mean that metaphysically or scientifically, but as an allusion to the possibility that there are perhaps patterns and principles within thinking itself that are not necessarily logical per se, not necessarily algorithmic. By algorithmic, I mean there's not necessarily like an explicit connection. In many ways, it's inferred. So much of our lives is inferred, you know? And so what I mean to say is that the analogy is that we make this distinction in our minds between what is wild and what is civilized. And another way of thinking about that is in terms of order and disorder. Wild and civilized, order and disorder. And I'm as programmed as anyone else to prefer order. I have but one friend who prefers disorder. One friend with a taste for the pure wild, the wild nights that once were our luxuries. Look at these Rococo tints. Look at this luminous world. This new luminous world. It's like Watteau had painted this. Pardon me. But I think that there's a sense in which the wild and the civilized work in relation with one another. And that means that order and disorder are working with one another. But the point is that we mistakenly confuse disorder for a negative. We confuse the wild for a negative. Because in many ways, we're playing out, whether we're secular or Christian, we're still playing out this narrative where order has to triumph over disorder. There's a sense in which in the back of our minds, we just assume that civilization will save everything and just keep going on forever. But that's pure fantasy. And the truth is not negative. It's out of a fear of a perceived negativity. But the truth is that we're a part of a process. And there's a certain sense in which existentially, like on an individual level, you can do quite a bit. But you're also trapped. Even the freest among us are still trapped. And what I mean to say is that there's a sense in which you ultimately are forced to accept, or you learn to trust, that underneath the chaos, underneath the disorder and craziness, there's something else working its way through. But I'm not talking about Hegel, fuck you. I'm not talking about that. And I'm not talking about anything metaphysical. I guard myself against that. But I'm always in tension with the metaphysical, like in terms of how I think. So I guess this will become more clear the more that I'm able to keep you entertained, as much as keep you interested in what I'm trying to say. I don't want to lose you. One of the great things about, I think, coming from where I come from is that I've been around people long enough, real people, through jobs or whatever else, to where I know how short the attention spans are. And in the first video, I mentioned that I've been doing recordings for years. It's been a wonderful way of, as I said, self-examining. In other words, the unexamined life isn't worth living, as Plato says. And so if you're blessed with having family members or a community where you have people that are sincerely listening to you, then that is a true gift that you can't replace with anything. But if you don't have that in the immediate vicinity, or if, people are busy because life is difficult, there is a sense in which simply recording yourself allows for a particular kind of self-awareness or self-reflexivity, as philosophers sometimes call it. And that self-reflexivity that comes from recording your voice, recording yourself, a lot of people see it as purely negative. Really humble people see it as self-centered or negative to record yourself. And I had that hang up too for the longest time. In many ways, it's what's prevented me from recording. But I can talk for hours at a time. So many of my recordings are 1 to 2, 3 hours, and I will wear people out, in fact, in person. So there's a sense in which I turn to recording myself so that I could express my own ideas and learn how to speak, but not annoy and bore people, because in my public life, I've worked in a lot of places, and I've learned that you've really got to be on point if you want to keep people's attention. And it means you have to give yourself away. It means you have to sacrifice a lot of what you are. In fact, that's just the way that you can ultimately get the real joy and benefit with being with people. But that's just, I guess, my own personal anecdotal opinion. Because what I'm meaning to suggest is that Circle 8 itself is an expression of this. Again, like I was saying in the last video, I'm not building this world from principles or fake architecture. It comes out of something that's growing inside of me for a long time, and it goes way before I was doing recordings. It goes back into my childhood. So in many ways, like what I call Circle 8 is sort of like a tree that is springing from my my consciousness. And by tree, I mean it's something that is growing, and I think it's ripe. Like I'm giving off fruit. I mean, what can I say, baby? I'm ready to bloom. And I hope I can figure out better recording equipment so that I can walk and record myself more easily. You know, I'm becoming more accustomed to it by recording myself out when I'm like walking regularly or running. And so why not just like speak, you know? Like I have nothing to lose. And so this is Circle 8. I have no idea what I just said, but this is my second recording, and I love you guys.